Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and hopefully we aren't getting an issue with the sound. How's the sound on your end, Allison? Good? Okay.
Good. Can you hear
Perfect.
me?
I can. Thank you. So we're back. We're back again. Thank you guys for joining us once again. And so as always, we're gonna show another episode. We're gonna show part four of the five-part series that I recorded with Allison on May 20th of May 20th. May what was the date? Now I can't think of it.
17th,
17th? Yeah, it
maybe?
was the 17th of 2020. And so as you're watching this, if you have questions for Allison or I, just put the word question in the comment section on or the chat section on the YouTube. And if you could just help us share this, we'd love to get more people involved with this conversation. It's obviously a challenge if people are unaware, you kind of coming at this with not understanding any of this stuff. But we'd actually like to hear from those people as well, because it'll help us to figure out, like, how to better describe, I know I am, and I know Allison is too, but trying to figure out how to describe some of this stuff to someone who um, doesn't doesn't realize, you know, hasn't studied it. Allison,
Hi.
so before we
Thanks
start,
for hosting us again.
yeah, before we start, was there anything that you wanted to bring up, or anything you wanted to say before part four, or any thoughts that have
I
come to
don't have
mind?
any unburdening tonight, so we're
Okay.
okay.
Well, it's Sunday was like several days ago. Are you sure?
I know.
There's-
I wrote it all in a new blog post, so I got it off my chest.
oh, good, good. Okay, well, I guess we'll just go right into it, and then we'll be back in. I don't know how long this segment is. I know it's about an hour. Yeah, it's actually, this is a short one. This is a 39. This is about a 40 minute. This one's 40 minutes. So great. Well, we'll see you guys in 40 minutes.
40 minutes. Okay.
Bye. Even without the technological, new technological reinventions, I guess you would say, this problem has been with us for a long time. The problem
Yeah.
of, the Wall Street and, like, say the C word,
Yeah.
capitalism. But, we haven't really addressed. I mean, a lot of people still believe that whole adage. Oh, it's not a perfect system. It's got flaws, but it's still the best system we've ever created. That people still believe that. They still think that there's.
I think a lot more people are questioning it.
That's true.
I mean, we don't make stuff anymore, right? Like even like our farms are taken over by mega corporations that are like doing industrial agriculture. Our food is industrialized. Now we're not even getting to have teachers and healthcare providers. Our industry is offshored. How do we get back to having like a real life, and having some control over that, because we're living in a debt finance matrix, and we're servants to that. So
I don't know if it's worth going into, but we were talking about, like, this is probably even outside of your study, but about the RNA, the vaccine.
well, I mean, I think that's the question, because I think people think vaccine and they're like, oh, that's the vaccine I got when I was a kid. But no, the mRNA vaccine platforms that are being advanced, many of them advanced through Bill Gates, and Gavi, his vaccination program. They're synthetic biology. They're bioengineering. There's one thing to have precision medicine for people who have a serious medical condition for which that is really the optimal tool, right? Like you have an inoperable tumor or something. Like, I'm not saying that doesn't have its place, and that there are not interesting elements to that. But the other piece is that we're talking about biological engineering the global population probably multiple times, given how they're talking about it, with unknown consequences. And in fact, Moderna, which is one of the ones that's being backed by Gates, like on their website, they describe their platform as the software of life, right? I mean, it's right there on their website. The software of life, backed by Bill Gates. Like, do we want to be the Windows, of the world, like human beings? Like, do we want to be genetically modified organisms? And we should have a right to decline that level of intervention. I mean, the other thing that's interesting about Gates and bioengineering is that, it has a very close collaboration with the University of Washington, in Seattle. And one of these big breakthroughs in the past year is that with the Internet of Things and with all ubiquitous computing and the vast amount of data that's going to be advancing, they need new data storage options, right? Like these server farms and stuff, like very energy intensive, and where would they put all this data in the cloud? Because the cloud is still a physical thing, like even though it seems like it's ethereal, like it lives somewhere, is that they have actually developed read and write data storage within DNA, okay? And that's developed at the University of Washington with Microsoft Research. So, now we've got these questions like, okay, like there's potential for storing, what are we storing in DNA? Like, are we injecting these DNA systems in our body? Like, what are the long-term implications of all of this? There should be way more bioethical discussions about what this means, like beyond even just like profit over vaccines or it's really incredible. I would think probably most people out there have no idea that they're doing DNA data storage, right? Like that's just not even anything people normally talk about.
Did you read any of that stuff I sent you about smart dust?
Yeah, I know. I mean, and that's the thing, like this neural dust and DARPA this is the stuff they put on their web pages. This isn't confidential. Like
Right.
imagine the confidential stuff that
Right.
they have.
Right.
So I talk a lot, like I think like different ways of thinking about things. And I think about like, the cyborg world and the people who would prefer not to be in the cyborg world. And I feel like the cyborg world is antithetical to liberation. And so I think a lot like that it merits looking at what are the historic precedents for resistance to enslavement and how Black people and Indigenous people have resisted these systems of domination. And I think looking at slave revolts and looking at these it's really useful to think about because there clearly are groups of people who have been operating and surviving under these systems for a very long time. We have a lot to learn from. But I think about marronage, which is sort of Afro-Caribbean, but also like in Brazil and in the dismal swamp of North Carolina, where the slaves would sort of back up and escape and create their own communities, these subaltern communities in physically distant places. And I keep thinking like, what is marronage in the cyborg age? Like, and drones, like how would that manifest? But that is just your physical nature. Like I'm almost thinking like, are we in a position that we would have to consider like mental marronage, like where we actually somehow have escapism to control our own thoughts and mental processes if we're in a position where through nanotechnology, our neural links or things that our consciousness can be changed in ways that we may not even be aware of, like in terms of personal autonomy at the cellular level, at your bodily level, but also in your mental level. It's a lot to think about.
Right. Mental slavery. Tinfoil hats. No.
Well, I mean, this is real technology.
Yeah, no, I know.
And I have to say, like, the thing I wanted to mention about the Gates and the mRNA is that they were talking about, like, I know a lot of people sort of throw off, oh, it's not a chip. They're not putting a chip in you. Like, no, they don't need to put the chip in you yet. But what the delivery device that Gates was backing was a quantum dot tattoo, which had data elements in it. And when I was trying to sort of look at what was happening in New York in terms of the health impacts, I was thinking, was it environmental? And I was looking at nanoparticulates and nanotechnology. And the Gates quantum dot tattoo is a nanoparticulate. The delivery system involves nanoparticulates, which the medical research indicates can have negative impacts on respiratory function. And that's been well documented for a decade. And many of these nanoparticulates are framed as medical devices, which are much less regulated than drugs. They're just tiny little machines in you. So there's just a lot of stuff that we should be talking about, like not to mention tying this to health passports. Even if they don't use the quantum dot tattoo, if these new Defense Department injections have an RFID chip, like not a chip, but an RFID barcode that can be attached to your digital identity, they don't need to chip you, your phone is your chip. Until eventually the phone goes away and we're all just doing wearable technology or implantable tech. And I don't know how long it will take us to get there. Clearly we're going faster than I thought.
We haven't really talked about 5G, but do you want to say anything about the rollout of 5G? I know there's a lot of questions about it and a lot of unanswered questions, really.
Yeah.
From a health standpoint, I don't really know what to believe as far as from the health standpoint.
Well, it has not been sufficiently studied to have the rollout. So what people need to know about 5G is that these small cell installations have a very limited reach. So there have to be many, many more of them, like every 1,000 feet or something. So there's way more small cell installations that are needed for 5G. And they don't even do well off trees. Like some places are like, oh, we should just cut down all our trees and have metal trees that accommodate the 5G. I mean, it's incredibly anti-life. I mean, and so these local governments have no say in how these small cells are installed or what happens to them. So even from a local government standpoint, even Seattle government pushed back about this and tried to sue them because the FCC said, no, you have no say in any of this 5G installation. So even the fact that the city of Seattle was questioning it says a lot, I think. There's a coalition of 240 scientists that have been petitioning the World Health Organization and the UN Environmental Program about the impacts of 5G to study it and mitigate potential negative harm. I mean, they're not just saying don't do it, but they're saying understand the nature of it and do everything you can to minimize harm. And that has not been addressed. And it hasn't been addressed because the fourth industrial revolution runs on the Internet of Things. And it's not just 5G. They're already anticipating 6G, and 6G will be device-to-device communication, with people out of the loop. So AI.
Mesh network.
Yeah. So that's what's coming next. It's already 6G. And so, the question is, and it will be hackable, right? This stuff will not be secure. And this is what I've been pushing back as somebody who comes out of the humanities is are we supposed to be give over our lives to build the virtual world for the robots, for some crazy singularity that has potentially irradiation that kills the microorganisms and the bees and it heats them up because it's radiation on their exoskeletons, and that we've got to devote our lives not only to building it but to being the army to secure it because it's all hackable? Why do we just not do it? Why do we want to create an infrastructure that will allow dehumanization? I mean, I'm just not buying that we should have to do that. And so the World Health Organization and the UNEP won't, because the Sustainable Development Goals and the impact investing need the 5G to happen. And that's why no one at a local level can refuse it, and at local government level. And that's why people are so angry, is that the research hasn't indicated that it's safe. It is different forms of radiation that can have impacts maybe not only on people but on invertebrates. We need our pollinators, right? We need the things that keep the soil alive to live. I don't want to live in a world that's all of our food is grown in a lab and hydroponic warehouses. That's not the real world. So I don't know if that's, I mean, we've got 5G, it's rolled in, we're on lockdown. I know they're making fun of people, but they are putting it in right now. I saw them put it in. Just around the corner on my block, we have one on either end of my block, and I'm really concerned about it going up on the phone pole outside my bedroom window. It's a military technology. It is a domestic military occupation.
Makes sense. In terms of having this conversation, what are your thoughts about, the media and how it basically prevents any real discussion? There's an utter lack of intelligence on the supposed left and the supposed right, when it comes to the media. And there's an utter inability. Well, I've experienced this more than you have. But, for people to actually engage in intelligent conversation about a lot of these things, it's just complete shutdown nope, you're an anti-vaxxer, you're a conspiracy theorist, and just like name calling, and there's no actually engagement in the content itself. It's like, okay, let's actually look at the arguments that are being made. What are your thoughts on kind of like the divide and conquer things that seem to be going on in this country and probably around the world too, but I can speak for this country.
Yeah.
It seems to me, my whole existence for the most part of my adult life has been about facilitating conversations.
Yeah.
So I would show a documentary and I would say, hey, if we all just, if you disagree, I'm gonna here's the microphone. Sure, tell you what you think. What do you think? You disagree? I disagree, and I would chime in.
Right.
And it was just like there's the ability to have actual conversations has been dampered quite a bit, like especially with the coronavirus now that people are like terrified and it's like I'm promoting mass murder or something by questioning.
Well, the thing that I find frustrating is that like very few people, I don't know, for me, like I understand Davos, like I understand this is a global situation. I understand that this is about powerful financial interests that are transnational. Most people don't think that way, right? Most people are thinking about their community, their country, the partisan politics, like what side they're on, and they feel like this polarization keeps everybody really busy and angry, but it doesn't ever let them look to see the real nature of the threat, right? And I think like very few people, like, oh, sorry, wait, I guess there's a
Philly cracks me
wheelie.
up.
I know. I'm like, where are the wheelie kids?
The only place you could see people, last night when I got into town, I saw like people on dirt bikes and four-wheelers, like just going down the middle of the fucking street. I'm like, oh,
see, the
gotta
thing
love
is, like,
Philly.
I have Philly. Like, I love the resistance of Philly. Like, I came here and I appreciated all the wrong things about it, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, there's like the best resistance stuff here.
Yeah, and I had a bad taste because when I came out to work on Sherry's campaign, my interaction was with the politics, and I'm like, God, this city is just dirty. Like, I mean, politically dirty.
Yeah,
like,
it is.
I'm like never like out in the open. Like, we don't give a fuck. Like.
But see, and that's the thing. Like, if you're talking partisan politics, like we are a city of very deep poverty that has been run by Democrats for forever, right? Like that's the reality. We are our state has a Democratic governor that maintains a family detention center that he could close. Like one of 4 family immigrant detention centers, and it's the Democrats, right? So when people are really hyper partisan and really like angry about these things, I'm like, yeah, but like in my community, the people that I'm up against are the Democrats. That's just what it is. Like I'm fighting this. They're not on the right side. I'm not saying the Republicans would be on the better side, but I'm fighting the status quo, and the status quo is the Democratic Party. So once you understand that we're dealing with what's being put into place is global finance that's embedded in Philadelphia. Like a lot of those global financiers come straight out of Wharton, and they live out on the main line, and they have ties to my community, but they're operating at a global level. And most people can't get there because I think their identity is wrapped up so much in being part of a community and reinforcing where they are in that community. And they don't want to be wrong. And they don't want to look stupid either. You know what I mean? Like, so it just continues to double down. And the fact that we're living in a digital world mediated by algorithms that create feedback loops that guide people's, and I'm not talking about like fake news or like trolls or things. I'm just saying like the way you consume media reinforces certain patterns that creates more and more extreme behaviors. And so and it lacks nuance, right? Like these digital situations totally lack, like I'm always so grateful to like when I get a chance to meet somebody I know online in person. I'm like, we're not robots, like we're actually real people, right? Like it's great to see you. Right. So it's not conducive to dialogue because the media as the role of the media, both the mainstream media, the social media, even the alternative media, is to have people not look at the thing. Because if we all looked at the thing and we saw it with clarity, as John Trudell, like clear thinking human minds, if we used our brains and we looked with clarity, we would be an incredible threat to what's coming. And so we're in the process of being managed through these platforms, largely.
Yeah. Do you want to say anything more about the fear and the COVID? Because I just think that's really relevant in terms of being an obstacle to getting people to look at some of these other things. At least that's just been my experience.
I think my position is that I wish, it feels like decisions are being made beyond the reach of the people. And that there isn't space to weigh the possible risks against the consequences of the decisions as a whole community. In a sense of, this is the thing you hear a lot about blockchain is trust. Like we've really eroded trust. Trust in our government, trust in one another, trust in the facts. Like we have very little trust until the tech people sweep in with blockchain is your trust. But if we lived in a world where we respected one another and we had empathy, authentic empathy towards one another, I think we could have more robust conversations about risks and benefits of how to deal with what's unfolding. But that's not how it's happening. That's not meant to happen that way. Clearly what's happening is that there are playbooks, right? There are playbooks that are rolling out. Region 1 does this, Region 2 does that. It's a very structured response. It's not organic. It's not one community decides to do things a certain, for the most part, with community input. For me, that is what is meaningful, in my worldview, is that people should have the right of free association of their lives and their labor, and they should have an ability to have some control over that and what their future is. Presuming, again, you're not harming other people in the process. And we're not there with this situation. Yeah. I mean, if there was a space of trust and communication and there were dialogues meant and decisions were made that were perhaps not my first way of doing things, but I felt like there was consensus and people were heard, then it would be very different than just being handed edicts. And I have to say, the contact tracing, the digitization, the surveillance state, these laws that imply that they can take possession of people's bodies for disease surveillance, people who may be asymptomatic, the implications of that for people's family structures, it's really, really concerning.
Mm-hmm. You didn't talk about Wharton. Do you want to say a few words about Wharton?
Before I understood about Arthur Rolnick and Stephen Rothschild, who jump-started things back to the mid-90s, I initially thought that the key person, and she still, I think, is a key person, Judith Rodin, who was the former president of Penn, who, when she left Penn, became head of the Rockefeller Foundation. Okay, so the Rockefeller Foundation was the organization that coordinated this new game in the sort of lead up to, it was 2007-8, so the last crash, which essentially the upending of the social fabric that last decade really has paved the way for the poverty and the gig economy that is now going to be harvested for this human capital program. So Wharton, is the business school of Penn. There's a lot of innovative finance that comes out of Wharton. Their intersection of Wharton with Angela Duckworth, who's the character lab person, who's the grit professor. She's made her reputation in grit and using data technology to make us make good choices. That's being backed now by Chan Zuckerberg. But there's also a lot of innovative healthcare systems that are tied to Wharton, and healthcare tied to behavioral economics and wearable technology that's connected to Wharton. There are individuals there that are connected to Kevin Werbach is a very prominent professor in gamification and blockchain. So it's not just Wharton. I mean, in many respects, I mean, Wharton has a lot. Harvard Kennedy School is a huge, that's where the social impact bond lab was, or it has been. I think it changed into the government performance lab. But Harvard Kennedy School and Michael Bloomberg is very well plugged into all of that. And Stanford. Stanford is another huge piece. Stanford Social Innovation Fund has done a lot around innovative finance and predictive analytics and behavioral economics. So there are these different esteemed institutions that are all connected in building this apparatus. I mean, I will also say, I forgot, so I had mentioned earlier about the MacArthur Foundation and this grant, this $100 million and change grant that went to the AI tablets for the Syrian refugees. That competition, there were several hundred people that made it to the final round. Those who didn't get the $100 million were sort of swooshed over to a program that's based at Penn called the Center for High Impact Philanthropy. So now they have a database of all of these vetted programs, evidence-based programs that impact investors can come in. So the other piece about Penn is that the School of Social Sciences and this high impact philanthropy is also operating some of the apparatus of this, hosting these, here's our Rolodex of, wonderful impact opportunities. So a lot of the modeling for the learning ecosystem has been advanced through white papers through an organization called KnowledgeWorks. KnowledgeWorks is backed by the Gates Foundation. It's based in Cincinnati, and that is important because Procter & Gamble was actually in on the ground floor of a lot of this, and Procter & Gamble was the home of the early development of the Internet of Things. So KnowledgeWorks advanced this concept of the learning ecosystem where you would just collect competencies. This is tied to competency-based education, also known as mastery or proficiency-based education, that you would sort of demonstrate skills in different things, and through these new technological systems, they would zing, go up into your learning locker to show that you've checked the box. And this idea that you remove seat time, you don't have to be in school any set number of hours, this idea that you would do, they frame it in really lovely terms like pursue your passion and do project-based learning and work-based learning, and you can become the person you want to be. That's presuming a 14-year-old actually knows what their life trajectory is going to be in the world of the robots. But this idea that you would have a lot of your learning would take place outside of school, but this is all happening under this surveillance state and mediated through devices and wearable technology and Internet of Things. It would function with these blockchain education vouchers, which were being set up with debit cards, these education savings accounts that have been popping up all over the country. I think the intention is that you have a blockchain identity, you get an education voucher and you spend it, and you do various things either through online systems or checking in at community-based centers and demonstrate things. And these smart contracts will upload your skill points, into your learning locker for future human resources. And they frame it, there's a program, the MacArthur Foundation, which is based in Chicago, again, the commodities futures. MacArthur was very big into digital media and learning. That's their focus, millions of dollars, millions and millions over 10 or 15 year period. That you are, the city is your classroom, and it sounds really lovely, right? I'm in Philly, I love my city. Actually, I could walk in a 40-minute walk from here and do any number of amazing learning experiences. It's a very different thing if you're learning in a panopticon to demonstrate your worthiness for the gig economy, right? That's a very different thing than just a free, Freirean, learn with other people type of environment. But that program that MacArthur was advancing is called Cities of LRNG, and there are, I think at this point, about 10 of them. Philly is one, Dallas is one, San Diego is one. Many of them are also smart cities, so cities with the 5G, with the Internet of Things rollout, with data-driven government, open data portals. And I think there's questions with this learning ecosystem model that I've had. In Philadelphia a few years ago, there were 2 black men arrested in a Starbucks for just waiting for a business meeting, right? It was a big national thing. It was terrible. So what does it look like for a learning ecosystem when you're a young black man, right? And you're on a tablet, in the city in a place that you're perceived not to be welcome, right? But you're just learning in the ecosystem, right? With and increasingly militarized high-tech policing systems, right? Like there are many, many questions that we have to ask about, like what does removal of seat time and just throwing people out into the whims of, structural racism in an urban environment of that we're existing in now. What does that mean? What are the implications? Because I think it's not, and when you have blockchain and you're coding good choices and bad choices and weighting them and tracking people's possible mental health through their interactions with digital technology and profiling them that way for human capital and Goldman Sachs and the Federal Reserve. Like they're huge, huge questions. So this idea of a learning ecosystem, of collecting skill points in an urban environment, if you're a person for whom that urban environment is not a comfortable place, through devices, being profiled, increasingly they're tracking affect through facial recognition through these devices and making presumptions about people. There's just a lot of ethical concerns about this model when you layer in like ongoing structural racism into the equation and what it means, who is preferenced in these situations. And I would say, having lived through navigating the Philadelphia public schools situation, for our family, I was privileged and it worked for us. We had a kid for whom it worked for them. We ended up in the places they claim to be the right places, whatever that means, right? Like we have one child for whom they did not have that many challenges to face. It's still exhausting to navigate this choice process. And even with all of the social capital that our family has. The idea of losing school as a physical place beyond a drop-in center, and being a parent, maybe a single parent, maybe a parent for whom English isn't your first language, maybe you have multiple kids, maybe you have a child with complex learning needs, navigating. It's not just navigating your child's elementary school, then trying to get a middle school maybe and a high school. Like that's hard enough. Imagine that learning in an ecosystem is for every kid putting together 20 different badging opportunities and navigating transportation and navigating like the blockchain payment systems for that, times multiple kids, some of whom have special needs. Like, what does that actually look like? I don't think we're prepared before we roll out this ecosystem thing, because the MacArthur Foundation and the impact investors say that they want the human capital data analytics. We need to talk about it. And it could be that some people, like, I'm wrong, and some people find it amazingly liberatory to live on the blockchain and navigate these things, and they think that it's not that some people get shunted at young ages into like dead-end tracks. But I have a lot of questions about that. So I think it should be a very robust public discussion and something that isn't predetermined by this lockdown, online education, crappy stuff that we're coming to.
So it seems like that, it's like this is kind of a top-down command and control dictation of how things should be, education and many other fields. I don't know if you've ever read Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed, but that idea, I think, is appealing to a lot of people, of a relationship. It's more about, it's not like a teacher-student relationship, but it's more of a teacher-student, student-teacher, like they're kind of interchangeable, and there's more of a respectful relationship there, as opposed to more of an authoritarian, because it's like we're talking about an authoritarian model of these are the dictates, they were created somewhere else, and now you go.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that, like in terms of how this literally this changes our relationships with one another and with with authority?
Well, see, so it's interesting because the framing of the people who are advancing this model, like they frame it as student-centered. Like it's framed in very progressive language, which essentially means the student is the commodity. They don't say it that way. They say it's student-centered, and students can pursue their passion, and the learner is in charge, right? And so it's framed much along those lines. So they use all of this language because they know it's appealing. They say, oh, we don't want the sage on the stage. They're going to the guide on the side. But what they don't actually tell you is that the guide on the side is the reasoning mind avatar. Because the goal of this model is to isolate people and extract as much data as possible. So when they talk about project-based learning, which sounds great, they don't really say like, oh, but it's in a VR headset and you're going to be in North Dakota collaborating with a person in New Mexico in the haptic robotics lab. Like they don't say that's you think project, and I wrote a blog post about like my kid's paper mache penguin, like the penguin research project, and making them. I think a lot of parents think like, oh, projects are really cool. Like as long as like those group projects, they always kind of screw up. But like in a concept, like, but we're moving towards virtual projects. So I don't know. Like I have mixed feelings because I think relational learning is hugely important, and like Leanne Simpson is a researcher that I really value her insights, and she's Anishinaabe and looking at like land-based, like land as pedagogy and like that worldview, Ojibwa like worldview. And there's a story about like the young child seeing like the squirrel and figuring out the maple syrup and teaching the parent, and that it's like a very reciprocal, which is beautiful. Like they're like, and the young person was supported by the community, and the community appreciated what the young person had to offer, and in that way it's really wonderful. I'm just trying to think of what that looks like for more complex knowledge sharing. Like what does that look like in physics? And because I'm really loath to give away this sense of like, I think there's something in being able to learn not through in a space that's surveilled, whether actively or passively surveilled. And I don't know how we're going to carve away spaces for that to keep happening. And I don't know, like I'm not an expert. I mean, there's part of me, I think they put a lot of pressure on kids, this new model, to make all their own decisions in ways that are hard. Like sometimes people need a little structure. Like just throwing everything open and being like, just you be the decider and you're 7 years old. Like there is a certain thing like we've seen in the education space where they're like, just do whatever you want. And like kids are not necessarily gonna, I don't know, like from a Freirean standpoint, like we're not in a society that we're like, maybe unschool, like maybe in that setting it works, but like all that I have seen when I was working in education was that people actually did appreciate having some guidance. Like not necessarily authoritarian guidance, but someone like mediating that relationship. So it feels like there must be kind of some sweet spot. But at the same time, I'm not about hierarchy and like that you need to be credentialed to have knowledge, because clearly there are many people who have like knowledge to share that haven't gone through non-traditional channels.
Well, and having it be human-centered rather than institutionally centered, I think is a huge difference. Like having a person who's flawed and may fuck up is less. I'm less concerned about that than the impersonal, institutional, models of this is how you do it.
And maybe I don't know. I mean, maybe all of this very high learning like is moving us into this tech thing that we have people who can do very sophisticated things, but they can't really think about the implications of what it is they're doing.
Compartmentalization.
I think so.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, do we really want to like eliminate the world? I'd prefer not.
And I just think a lot about this idea of what it means to be a professional, which is you as a professional, you're supposed to remove yourself from the equation. You're not supposed to have emotions or feelings or objections to this. This is what your job is. You do what your job is set to do, and it's the ability to remove the human being from this whole process, even of your own life. Like you're conditioned, you're trained to do your job as a professional. And that, that kind of scares me too.
Well, that's why I feel like in some ways I operate in an interesting space because the work that I do, I'm not doing it because I'm paid to do it. I'm doing it because I feel really compelled to do it because of the consequences of not doing it. And the space in which I work, which is mostly my blog and talking to people, doesn't require me to be credentialed. If you value what I have to offer and say in my blog, awesome. If you don't, that's fine. I don't really have anybody leaving me nasty comments, but like you can walk away from it. But I can use this space. I don't have to be peer reviewed. I don't have to be academically published. I don't have to be like getting some, money from some magazine or newspaper in the thing. I'm just doing it to express my view of the world and hopefully connect with other people for whom that resonates and maybe they have something to add. I wish I had more comments on my blog. It would be nice to be more interactive there, but it's not. But I'm just really lucky in that my life circumstances are that I have a chunk of time to do this thing. And I'm as I've said before, I'm living in a space where the impacts of this apparatus are very direct and very in front of me, affect people I care about, people that I respect, and who I realize that are, this system is just a harsh and brutal system. It's not just an abstraction. So, but I also have the presence, the physical support to do the work in a way that people who are in the middle of these crises are not in a position to do. And I just hope I can do right by that. I don't.
Okay, thank you guys. That was a shorter one. So yeah, we did get a few questions, and I just want to make a quick comment. I mentioned this last week, but one of the things we're trying to do is have a focused conversation specifically about the research and the work that Allison's doing, and there's a huge there's a huge hole missing and from a lot of the discussions that are happening out there regarding social impact and some of these new markets coming online, the Internet of Bodies, Internet of Bio Nano things, and how it all connects. And so that's what we're trying to do here. And I've always had a hard time because like, I just want everyone to be able to share their views, but I have been lately trying to more focus it and be a little bit more intentional about like curating the conversation, because a lot of times it gets sometimes it's just someone just makes they're having another conversation, because that's social media, people having a conversation, then it branches out and splits out, and then sometimes there's some people that are actually intentionally trying to change the conversation, but I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. But I just wanted to mention that because I was like trying to steer the questions and the comments back to the content that we're trying to focus on here today. So if you do have more questions regarding this, or even any of the previous work that Allison's done, this particular segment of the interview was kind of narrowly focused on a few things. But so I do have a few questions, but first I want to just ask Allison, after rewatching this again, were there any things that came to mind for you?
I mean, I think the beginning, it's funny to listen to something like May 2020, right? The whole conversation about more like the medical stuff and the vaccinations is, it's interesting to reflect on. I mean, I don't think that there were things said that were inaccurate and that things have progressed, but now they're at a much more sophisticated level, than they were when we were just talking about the rice quantum dot tattoos. There seem to be, and I would say, in that regard, there are people who have like spent the vast majority of their time focusing on the medical side of things, which isn't where I put my primary emphasis. So, yeah, I mean, that wasn't particularly scintillating at this point. I think last week someone said anything that's like older than a year isn't relevant. And I would say maybe that beginning part isn't super relevant beyond the fact that like, as a testament to where we were at that point in time, what we were thinking and what we thought would be coming. And then the other chunk is about the education piece, which we can talk a little bit more about. I will say I was sort of checking in the chat area, like, because um, anyway, I clicked over so I could like see the comments while it was scrolling through for the most part. And you know, I don't know if we can share screens. Can we share screens on this
No,
later?
unfortunately, if you email me something, I can actually, or if it's a link or something, I can bring it up. But you can't do it
I
on your
might
end. Just, yeah,
I
if you
might
just,
send you a link
yeah,
if you
send me a
don't
link and
mind.
I can bring it up
If
on the
you could like
screen.
do a little bit of chatty while I send the link. But so I saw that there was some conversation around Chicago, which a lot of the digital media and learning that I'm talking about is actually based in Chicago, and the MacArthur Foundation and the work at the University of Chicago and the Argonne National Lab. So I wouldn't mind sort of showing a little CIS piece that I had come up with about that, and it might shed some light on Chicago broadly. And then it also has to do with, I think, the policing systems that someone had mentioned. Um, I can't remember if I talked about it on one of the other Q&As, but several years ago, there was an international police superintendents meeting here in Philadelphia. And somehow I came across, like, there was a public meeting with the company that did our city open data project. And then they actually ended up developing predictive policing software. So they were like selling their product. It was called Aceveo was the company, and Hunch Lab was their product. And so they during this conference, which is a private conference, they had a public meeting at their office, which is really strange. And it was strange that I would stumble across the announcement for this gathering, but I saw it, and I did, because there was this young guy from New York City, and he was in charge of the domain awareness system, which is the New York Microsoft collaboration on sort of connected devices and surveillance. But the other person that was there was sort of I don't know that he was necessarily the head of the Chicago police, but he was like a high level officer with the Chicago police system. So I do think that I saw, like, would we know if our consciousness was changed or shifted? And I would say, I think with frequency weapons, we may not. And I think some of that is related to using frequencies to provoke anxiety and potentially aggression in people. And I do wonder, in some respects, if sort of the violent outbreaks that we see in urban environments may not additionally be triggered by remote directed energy systems, like low level ones, not enough to like things that would change your mental state and make you more susceptible to being provoked in that way. And I think that that's used for measures of increased social control. I think there are also elements of using violence to suppress property value over time in certain communities, and the new versions of redlining, so that you can target areas and then come in and do a lot of gentrification. And we've seen that a lot in North Philadelphia, in the area around Temple University. So I think those are all really legitimate concerns. But I will, Jason, let me see if I can email you
Yeah,
this link
just
to
email
Argonne
me. And
National.
while she's doing that, I had mentioned in there, I made a comment about professionalism, and actually I was talking to Allison earlier about this. The idea that, like, once you're a professional, there's kind of a shift that happens in your thinking. And I know a lot of people that literally won't, if it doesn't come from like the New York Times or one of their like industry publications or someone that's credentialed or whatever, it doesn't have any merit. It doesn't have any value, doesn't have any meaning. Even like the testimony of like a poor person, whatever, I need to know what the experts have to say about their personal experience or whatever. And so, but it's a brainwashing, is a mental thing that happens. And there's a guy named Jeff Schmidt that wrote a book called Disciplined Minds that I've really pushed on a lot of people. But he was looking at what it means to be a professional, and he says the people in society who have the most creative freedom are actually conditioned to be the less likely to actually use that. So they have they're put into positions of somewhat decision-making power, but they've already been conditioned to make the decisions that they're supposed to make within the box, within the framework. And I would like to do another show about this. The show didn't come out quite as good as I was hoping, but it's still good. It was but I did a show of Disciplined Minds on the professional class, called Truth, Lies, and Ethics. And this is if you just look this up on my YouTube channel, episode 16. Um, I had the author, Jeff Schmidt, and then on the bottom, it's kind of dark. He didn't have a light on, but that's my friend Francis Newman, who was a chief physicist at University of Colorado Hospital. And actually, I've been good friends with him for many years, but he's taught me a lot about the medical world and some of the problems with that. And then my friend Sherry Honkala, who's an anti-poverty, a homeless organizer of homeless people and poor people in Philadelphia, and she's dealt a lot with the profession, the political professionals, be it in nonprofits or in like the Democratic Party. And of course, the Republican Party has their own version of it, which looks different, but you know, they're still dirty. But anyway, so if you get a chance, check out this show, because there is some pretty interesting stuff, and it's something that I actually want to do a lot more on, because that really is something that's not talked about. Like Jeff Schmidt's book is the only one that I know that starts to like take a critical look at the professional class. So anyways, I thought I'd throw that up there. So Alison,
Can I just chime in? So like part of our conversation today about this was there was someone who had written a piece about the blockchain ID program in Ethiopia. And this was someone who had like many credentials around AI and ethics. And so they had written this piece, but of course had nothing about social impact finance. It had nothing about ties between Cardano and Hanson Robotics and blockchain mines and Singularity.net. It was just at a very superficial level, even though this person was an expert, right? And they had, I don't know, in their byline, you know, 4 or 5 different organizations that they were affiliated with. And so I was sort of like calling them out on it. I was like, you need to dig deeper into this, because there's more going on. And, you know, the person like essentially like they did message me. You know, I'll give them that, but you know, when I pushed, I said, you don't know about impact finance, you don't know about the digital twins, you know, and they said, well, that's just not my area of expertise. Sort of like in a, like, not that tell me more like, well, that's just the end of that, because my area of expertise ends here, you know, and so this is all I do this. And for me, that's so frustrating, because like, I'm like this, like I do all of the things, you know, I'm like a little bit of everything. And like, let's try to like lay it out and make sense of what this actually is. And for the most part, people who are, you know, rewarded for being experts, they pick a little thing and then they talk about it. And, you know, you'll look up the talks that they give, and for the most part, like 80% of the content of the talk is all the same. And then like maybe they'll add in a few other things, but like this is their shtick. They talk about this one thing. And so there's no incentive for really broad synthetic thinking or thought, because if you start to creep over and you're the expert and you've got the, you know, the social acclaim and the financial rewards of being the expert, you have no incentive to go over and look into somebody else's expertise, because by doing that and presuming that you could go into their space and understand it, you are essentially undercutting your own status, undercutting the role of the expert. And so, you know, for me, I found on this journey over the last 5 years, and I'm somebody who has, you know, like I have an advanced degree, and I was really dumb about most of the things in the world. Like I did have no clue of all the things I didn't know. The people who taught me the most were people who often have their knowledge based in direct life experience and or followed non-traditional educational paths. And I will just say that, like, those are the people who actually have the most curious minds. And that's the thing, you know, I feel like in many respects we're lacking in the educational process, is the curiosity and then the confidence to say, I can have original thoughts, and the thoughts I think matter, if not to the world, then to me. Like, and there's satisfaction in thinking about these things and trying to put things together, because for the most part, like, the world is about consuming. It's about consuming pre-packaged information and not actually coming up with your own ideas. So anyway, I guess this has to do with later. We'll talk more about the school stuff. But, you know, I've mentioned this book a number of times called The Diamond Age, Neal Stephenson's book. And in the opening of that, essentially the entire story gets underway when an elite venture capitalist hires a bespoke design engineer to create a digital tutorial tablet, which is like an iPad, but this is 1995, so general people don't know about the iPads yet, to be their tutor, to be the granddaughter's tutor. And his goal is that he thinks that the children are being miseducated and having all of the creativity taken from them. And so he wants this, ironically, device to teach his granddaughter to be a more of a creative thinker, and to have that be her education. And then the story proceeds from there. But anyway, don't get your education from a tablet. Actually, yeah, just don't do that. It's a bad idea. But it was interesting to see how that was sort of presaged. Essentially, they were identifying the nature of the problem, the tyranny of the experts.
Yeah. Yeah. Where'd that term come from? Tyranny of experts? Because that actually would be a good place for source for me to. Do you know where that term comes from? Because that is
No.
essentially kind of partly what I'm talking about. I do have your.
I think they said something about being credentialed into ignorance.
Oh, right. Well, and I noticed that, a long time ago because I've been a self-learner. I never went to college. I barely graduated high school. But, I think I'm a fairly smart guy, but I'm self-directed. Like in high school, like, I read books. I've always read periodically throughout life, and sometimes more than others depending on if I was what I was in, but I've always read like mostly nonfiction books, and I've always been a curious person. And I noticed that like the people that I knew that had the highest degrees of education were like the most difficult to get to understand something that was so I'm gonna say it's obvious to me, but like yeah, there's an obstacle. There's a learning disability associated with high level degrees. That sounds terrible, but it's true. I'm sorry, but it's true. But they know a lot more about a lot of stuff that I don't know, that I don't need to know necessarily.
Well, often they know a whole lot about a little thing.
Right.
Because that's what gets rewarded with a high level academic context is specialty. You specialize.
Right.
And so we have a world of specialists who don't actually have any idea what's really going on.
Yeah.
Because they don't know what their specialty connects to.
Another thing I found interesting about, and Jeff Schmidt mentioned this in his book, is how academia favors like the theoretical sciences and the theoretical over the like experiential and observational. And he's a physics guy, so he was noticing that. But I've seen that especially and most prominently in economics, because economics is built, like most of it's built on theoretical models, and then they find information to support the theory, rather than just to say, okay, let's just like forget about the theory, like let's just start from just like taking a look and see what's going on here. So
because
I don't know, I
it's all fake.
Yeah, it
They have to make up the theories because they're just writing the story.
That's right, and it's writing the story. I did grab your Oregon National Library, if you want me to bring that one up.
Art Labs, yeah. Oh, and I will say, just because I know that Lisa put up her, oh gosh, is there any better resolution for me, or do I just have bad?
Oh
resolution?
no, I can bring it up.
Okay, because I only see like speckles. I don't think it's just my glasses.
Okay, well, yeah.
On Lisa's comment about the Roe v. Wade, and this isn't my original observation. I think I just started listening to somebody's talk that I didn't get through, and I apologize. I didn't know actually whose talk it was. It was a guy. It was like a middle-aged guy, white guy. But he was talking about that, and I think I agree that on the one hand, it is further inflaming the partisanship and the sort of the identity politics issues, which is like these hot button issues that are always happen. So agree that in his statement was the thing that stands between sort of ongoing internet of bodies interventions at a population health, public health level is the concept of my body, my choice and bodily autonomy. And so I do think that being a barrier, like at least theoretically conceptual for people, to have that removed and to say like, actually, you don't really have control over what goes in your body or what happens to your body, is an important next step. and I don't know down the road, ultimately with the whole reproductive process, if, their intention is to have something that is much more managed, you know, managed reproduction. I mean, clearly from the impact investing space, they're putting a whole lot of money into maternal health disparities and home visits and getting lots and lots more data on people and families and doing that, using that for the predictive profiling. So, I have a lot of concerns around, reproductive rights in terms of being actually able, like allowed to reproduce, and to like people who have children being able to keep their families. That's sort of where I'm at now. But I can conceive the fact that moving forward, bodily autonomy and bodily sovereignty and having a choice, the choice argument is really complex for them, and they have to navigate that. And so that Roe v. Wade may play into it. And again, for also keeping people riled up, angry, and separated on the issues is helpful to their program. So yeah. So did you want to maybe see if we could bring up the Argonne National Lab?
Yeah. And is it your screen better quality now?
Oh yeah, it is. It's
yeah.
good.
So I can adjust it. I just lower it because I want to reserve the bandwidth for the live stream, but we'll see. Go ahead.
Yeah. So what's important to know about Chicago, at least in my way of looking at things, is that the social impact bonds, their plan is to create asset-backed securities to securitize the debt for the public welfare systems, whether that's education, healthcare, food assistance, housing assistance, addiction treatment, mental health services, all of these things, and then trade that debt as a commodity, as a futures commodity. And so unlike Wall Street, which is stocks, the futures markets are in Chicago. And so the commodities futures trading, that's what is really central in the impact investing space, because it's these hedge funds. And actually one of the biggest hedge fund guys who was setting up the whole market with in Harlem Children's Zone with Robert Duger is Paul Tudor Jones. And Paul Tudor Jones, interestingly enough, got his start in cotton futures trading. So there's this historical backstory, to these things, the history of the slave trade and cotton and commodities and now impact markets. And so part of what happens in the futures markets is there's a lot of analysis, right, and predictions that goes along with that. And so essentially what I feel like is coming is that there's going to be this pressure to make us more and more like, we're already electric beings, right? We're already electric beings, but to harness and capture the bioelectric nature of our mental and physical functions through the introduction of bioelectronics, and then using the data from the bioelectronics in the sort of digital twinning simulations to make these predictions about the markets, and then ultimately also machine learning for the AI. So the thing beyond the commodities futures trading, and Jim Heckman, who's at the University of Chicago, and he has the Heckman equation that I'm always talking about, the 7 to 13% rate of return on early childhood investing. The MacArthur Foundation, which I talk about a little bit after this, but focuses on digital media and learning, and they're rolling these badges out in the library system. But outside of Chicago, there's actually 2 labs that are connected to the Department of Energy. And I just spent a lot of time this past week mapping, I think I mentioned it on Sunday, mapping all these Department of Energy sites, of which Argonne was one of the earliest. In the Manhattan Project. They were separating, I guess, the uranium, like one of the first controlled uranium experiments was under the stadium bleachers at the University of Chicago. It's kind of crazy. And they're like, hey, you know what? You guys should take that like a little bit further out of town, okay? And so they created Argonne, and then also in the 1970s, so that was in the 40s, during World War II. And then in the 70s, there was a second one with a particle accelerator called the Fermi Lab. But Argonne National Lab, a lot of what they do is actually supercomputing as well. And you can see in this space, I don't know, Jason, does my cursor show or no?
No.
You can't see my cursor. Okay. So you can see down there, there's the Computation Institute. they're part of the COVID-19 High Performance Computing Consortium. And my friend Steffers, who blogs at A Piece of Mindful, like she has talked a lot about these like the spike proteins and these like llama particles or whatever, and that like essentially the simulation of the virus, which has never been like actually isolated but has been simulated from fragments, like was done at Argonne National Labs, like through the University of Chicago. So it's not a surprise that the people who are setting up the futures trading systems are all embedded in the biosurveillance state and using biological bioinformatic computation to like essentially control the world, rule the world through the data analytics that they've got. One of the things that I've been very interested in for a while is something called the Phoenix software system that you can see there. And it's about differential equations. And so these differential equations are used in various things, but including trading, financial trading. And you can see under that, they're connected with something called WAGGLE, which is edge computing for smart cities. And so Chicago actually has something called, oh gosh, what is it called? Oh, it's the Internet of Things, the array of things, the array of things. Jason, can you swap for a second and put in array of things on the little search bar?
Yeah, just give me
real
a
quick
second.
and think about.
Yep.
Oh, do you have to pull it up? And
That's all right. Just give me 1 second. I can grab it.
okay.
You keep
So
talking.
there's the array of things. And when Comcast was piloting its Internet of Things program, the test beds for the smart city internet systems, the edge computing systems, were Philadelphia, Chicago, and the Bay Area, which is not super surprising. And I think in Raul at Siliconicers, he actually has an article on this edge computing system, like the low raw systems. So the array of things is the version that's in Chicago, and it's in the downtown area near the commodities trading, and they've got all sorts of like sensors on these units that are in the downtown area. So those are connected in with the lab system. And then all of the lab system is under the Department of Energy. And the Department of Energy is working on this moonshot project with Japan, which is the idea that you can have, like by 2050, we're going to operate as avatars with no physical mind or body in time and space. And so you can sort of see how the pieces start fitting together, that you've got this society 5.0, which is we're living outside of a physical body, happening through the Department of Energy. To get to that point, you start to manage the physical bodies as predictively profiled digital twins through these high performance computing systems, measuring them through differential equations, continuing to track through the edge computing systems. And then, I don't know.
Real quick, Al.
If Jason
Yeah, well, I searched array of things and nothing came up. What do I search?
Oh, okay. All right. Well, maybe it's different. Are you able to open the Rick Stevens link?
Did you send it to me?
Sorry, I thought it was like a screen sharing thing. It's not interactive, I guess. You can just
Well, I just have to. I can create a website and I can bring up the screen here.
Oh yeah, just Rick Stevens. If I could look at Rick Stevens for a second.
Okay. I just have to bring up a new thing. So.
Sorry.
That's all
So
right.
Rick Stevens, when I was doing a lot of work early on with my friend in the San Jose area, and we had stumbled across Data Zone, which is the interactive database in San Jose. I think I talked about that last time. And the National Laboratory for Education Transformation. Yeah, so you can see, so Rick Stevens, I think I said last week, I'm like, yeah, it was really concerning when I started mapping this National Laboratory for Education Transformation. And it actually goes back to supercomputing centers, right? Including Argonne. And so Rick Stevens is the guy who's embedded, but also this National Laboratory for Education Transformation tracks back to the Texas Applied Computing Center, TAC in Austin that Jason and I visited, as well as the supercomputing centers in Los Alamos and I think UC San Diego. So anyway, all of that said, like this is part of this vast simulation, like sentient world simulation modeling, which I think people are getting more and more familiar with. But to me, it's useful just to see how the different pieces fit together. Can I ask one last thing? Can we just pull up the National Laboratory for Education Transformation?
Okay.
Oh, look, you can click through.
I
Okay,
figured it
that's
out.
all I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
looking for.
yeah, yeah. Before
Okay.
it wasn't letting me use the search function. Is all I was having to do that separately. But I can click on the links, so we're good.
Oh yeah. All right, cool. Well, so you can see all of these people. Are you able to scroll up to the child organizations?
Scroll
Like,
down. I can't scroll up. There's.
yeah. So this child organization show. Yeah. So these are all of these different pieces. If you can maybe put child organizations up to the top level, like, is this all the way? Yeah, like stop there. Yeah, that's good. But these are all of the systems that are feeding into the National Laboratory for Education Transformation beyond Argonne, which is based in Chicago. So you've got the the Center for Learning Architecture, Center for Mathematical Thinking, the Learner Identity Center. Look, it goes back to 2011. This program, that Learner Identity Center is the blockchain transcripts and the education data optics and computational models of educational systems and linking all through the badges, which you can see towards the bottom, concentric sky. And that the San Diego County, because of their computing system, the San Diego supercomputer, as well as there's a lot of tech in Qualcomm in San Diego and nanotech, that they are early adopters for the badges and the workforce development system. So anyway, I'll pause. I think that's sort of the broad contours of some of the conversations that I saw that we were having in the toolbar while I was looking. But I don't know if people might have additional questions. I'm happy later to talk a little bit more about the digital badges.
Yeah, I've got a list of questions here. So we'll just start going through them, and some of them were just comments, but I thought they might instigate something interesting.
Instigator.
Instigators. Oh, someone made the comment that they've been doing these SDGs on poor people since before they had a name for it. They didn't clarify, what they meant by that. But anyways, I thought I would just mention that there are, people say, oh, this isn't new. It is true. There have been recent, earlier iterations of similar things that look differently, but maybe didn't have that technological component. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, when we had that, our clip that's at the LBJ library in Austin, like one of the things I wanted to bring out was from this book by Elizabeth Hinton, who's actually out of Harvard. And the more I think about it, probably this book is teeing up impact investing because she doesn't actually interrogate any of that or bring it up to date. But it's looking at the social safety net and the Great Society and the way in which that was married to an expanding police state, especially around like the police athletic leagues and the police-based after-school programs and policing and public housing, that under the guise of offering services to people, that they actually put vulnerable communities under a lot more surveillance. Now, at that time, it wasn't the same level of technological surveillance that we have today, but I think the same things are in place because Council for a Strong America, which is where Ready Nation, the workforce development badging program tied to impact investing, is situated. There are 5 total project focus areas. Ready Nation is the workforce one, but there's also ones to align children to police, the military, evangelical Christianity, and like athleticism. And so it's very clearly a propaganda program to get everybody on board with this. And it, yeah, so I agree totally.
So someone mentioned something about disability. What do people on disability like me, do we get a free pass? I'm asking how they're going to treat people on disability. Are we going to expect to learn off our whatever? The phrasing of that I think was a little off, but
well,
one
of the earliest pilots for programmable money, which is again, where people are always like, Alison, like, what's your, why are you so weird about blockchain? I'm like, well, all the use cases that I saw when I was looking at them were terrible. And one of the first ones, the early ones early on, was from, I think, Cicero in Australia, that they were doing programmable disability benefits. And actually, there's quite a bit of interest now because of telepresence labor and we've seen this in the United States, of revisiting qualifications for disability, and that you have to renew your status much more often to prove that you are entitled to that benefit. And so if you imagine, with all of this augmentation, right, and the adoption of telepresence work, they're going to expect people who currently would not be physically able to work now. Like, it's the whole welfare to work. Like, they're going to start to pull back on people's benefits, I think. And in fact, in Japan, which is on the bleeding edge of a lot of this, they were talking about having people with really complex limitations, who could not, like, literally move off of a bed or being in a hospital bed, run robots in cafes remote. And they said it's so wonderful. They have like a whole social life now that they can like run their robot, and interact with people through a robot. And again, this is all dual use. So on the one hand, yeah, there may be ways in which telepresence robots could enhance the quality of life of people who, had really serious restrictions due to their disability on mobility. But essentially, the program is going to be probably that, you have to work at the cafe to earn your hospital bed, that I don't think it's just going to be like, we're going to give you a robot so you can live an enhanced life. It's going to be, there's going to be strings attached to that. And it's, to me, I was hearing a lot of stuff in the Philadelphia a couple years ago, had a whole big rollout of their poverty committee. And nobody was talking about the fact that the wages, the wages for the top growth jobs were topped out at like $12 an hour. Like, there were a few that were like, you could be a manager or an accountant and maybe get $30 an hour, but most of them were well under $15 an hour. And so, but they weren't going to talk about the gig economy or the economics, like when they're talking about things like housing insecurity. They just talk all the way around it. And then you would hear things like, well, we have to retrain all of the elderly to do all of this technology work. And I'm thinking, well, if we're setting up the fourth industrial revolution that's displacing everyone out of jobs, why do elderly people have to do that? They shouldn't have to do that. Like, if the robots are doing the work, right? Like, and none of it starts to make sense unless you understand that, I think, in many respects, the platforms that we're going to be on are teaching the AI. And so they're not going to give the elderly jobs, but they're going to put them in wearable technology and make them fake like they're learning stuff, for these impact markets and to get the data. It's crazy.
Roma says, how did you get started with mapping the players in your city? I have a physical map. I would like to start tracking these entities, people in my own city. So how did you get started doing that?
Well, I was really naive.
For those listening, she actually got kicked off of Little Sis, which is a mapping software.
I know. Well, the thing is, like, so there was this software, and this is one of these life lessons, right? So I can't even remember how I first found out a lot about Little Sis. I mean, I was doing my education work, and maybe there was like a meeting that this organization was setting up research teams in all these different cities to like research the power. Only it was during the Trump administration, so it was very clear over time, eventually, that really they wanted you to research conservatives, and that was they didn't tell you that you couldn't.
Oh, you're breaking up. I'm going to lower your bandwidth to hopefully fix that. You with us? Okay, we lost Alison.
Started deleting stuff, but that
there you are. You're cutting out, Alison.
Did it froze?
Yeah. You just cut out. We didn't catch anything you just said. I just lowered your bandwidth again to hopefully help with that. But yeah. You're back
I
though. It
don't
seems
know.
like you're
It
back.
says that it's like all the bars.
Yeah, I don't know. Who knows? But you're back now. So just if you want to start that last part over again. Do you
About
remember?
little sis, all of
Yeah.
it.
Well, I mean, uh, kind of.
Okay. All right. So anyway, little sis, and they were setting up these different research groups in different cities. And anyway, I think that they were just tracking everybody from the back end. They had a very specific agenda of things that they wanted followed and the way they wanted to present the information, and it was very controlled. Only I didn't realize it till I had about 3 or 4 years worth of data in there, and the way their software was set up, which was open source theoretically, but unless you have like an independent server, it's hard to do anything with it to get it off. And now they've deleted all of my 300 maps that I made. The concept was that there would be a database record, and then there would be um, uh, circles, and you would make these connections. And I'm sorry, Jason.
That's
This is
okay. That's all right.
it's I have to say it's really hard for me to watch me really giant and grainy in two pictures of me. I can't actually focus on what I'm saying anymore.
Okay, that's all
um,
right.
maybe we could just cut it out. Like, you want to just end it?
Well, I have some more questions. I mean, if you want to do that, or if you're not up for that, that's okay.
Well, I mean, I'm just
Yes.
trying just. Okay,
Here, how's this? I sent you a different.
that's better.
I sent you a different signal, and that will be okay. So you can just look at me while you're talking.
All
Um,
right, that's easier.
uh, well, let me just run through some of these things, and you can take what you want, discard
Anyway,
the
so
rest.
long story short, I'm not in Little Sis anymore. It's not worth it. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone. It was a life lesson for me. I'm in this other platform now. I'm sure I'm going to probably have to leave that eventually because it's paid for by the bad guys too. So I don't know how to set up my own thing.
All right. Yeah, if somebody has a good suggestions for standalone mind mapping, and that's my problem. Is like everything's a web based, cloud based. So it's like they don't want you to have control over your own data. You have to. You're dependent. So I'm real big on hard drives and like having. I want to have my own data. Like I don't want to be dependent on the cloud. The internet goes down, or the company decides, oh, your terms don't meet our services. And that's you put a lot of work into this stuff, and then all of a sudden they just delete you. I'm actually interested if there are some standalone that you can actually download and have on your computer. Mind map softwares would be good. I that's my big thing is this move toward the rental economy. Like even like software, you pay a monthly fee to access it through the web. I don't think I think that's by design because it basically makes us dependent. We're all dependent on them, and they can flip the switch and turn us off at any point. So I don't know. That's a little side, a little side thing. Um, I'll go through these real quick and then we'll just see where we're at. The IMF recently created a new allocation of SDR supposedly to help poorer member countries during pandemic times. Are you familiar with that? There's
I'm not
okay.
super familiar.
Okay. Are there people involved with removing ed tech from schools? If no, are there any avenues for people to start getting these devices out of our schools? So like, what efforts do you know of actually pulling back from having these devices in the schools?
Well, I mean, my experience is, and it's hard to say if this is intentional or people who are well-meaning or if it's something else. What I experienced in the education space was largely no one was willing to look at the broader context, and so we would have groups that were focused on screen time. They would be like, and again, like, I agree that you want to reduce screen time, but as soon as they focus on screens, it's going to be wearables, right? And so the screen time people were just talking about, let's get legislation for screens. But then by the time whatever cycles through and you actually ever get anything on the books, which, is doubtful, it's going to be, you've got the EEG headbands and you've got these other things. So There are other groups that are working on like hardwiring. So this is like against the 5G, which again is it's good to a point. I would say if you have to hardwire things, then essentially that goes back to the era of, sorry, I've got a cough. um, uh, like a computer lab. Like when my child was young in elementary school, the kids would go to the computer lab a couple times a week for a certain amount of time, which was reasonable. Now, if you went to that model, that's doable. But again, right now when we're living in pandemic reality, like they've already given everybody Chromebooks. So I don't quite know how we back it off without expanding the conversation to say like what is ed tech really, and what are digital badges going to be really, and what is the surveillance, because even like then there are groups who are focused on surveillance in schools, but the surveillance they're talking about are things like maybe facial recognition going into schools or cameras in the halls, which again are a thing. They're not an insubstantial thing, but no one's talking about the fact that every single Chromebook, like every single camera on every single device, is also a surveillance device, and you've got the projection screens in the Promethean boards and everything in the classroom. They're all devices. They're all surveillance. So it's a bigger conversation that we have to have. So people tend to like nibble bits, like here we're going to talk about Go Guardian, or we're going to talk about the screening software for plagiarism, or we're going to talk about these bits. But if we don't look at the bigger picture, which is the next phase of globalization, which is through remote robotics and telepresence work and reliant on these mastery transcripts that are on blockchain, that are run by AI, we're going to have a world where all of the young people who are trying to come up and have jobs are going to be just, trapped in a series of badge chasing, debt finance, just a terrible, terrible situation. So, yeah, I mean, I wish that there were like somebody I could directly point to, but I think everybody has bits. Like there are people who are about student data privacy, but they're not really dealing with blockchain. There are people who are dealing with screens, but they don't know about the wearables. There's people dealing with surveillance, but it's not the devices. There's the hardwiring people, which I guess of all this, that might be the better angle, because trying to have a school that's any kind of public school that has no technology would be a hard sell. But if you wired them, at least the kids wouldn't have their whole school day on them.
Okay, so do you really think if enough people refused the social impact slave grid, we can actually prevent its rollout? So like I mean, to me, that's obviously if people don't, if people refuse
like,
it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we have to, yeah. I mean, what other choice do we have? I mean, I guess that's the thing. Like for me, once you know the stakes that the social impact control grid rollout is also enmeshed in post-humanism, bioelectronics, AI, we don't really have another choice. I mean, to me, like, and I mean, I can't speak for everyone, but for me personally, I can't quite figure out how we would fit into that world. To me, I feel like it would cause so much mental distress that I wouldn't be able to make, so in that sense, it's not like, well, maybe we can make it work. Like maybe we can make accommodations enough to figure out how to live in that world. I just don't think it's possible, because it's antithetical to everything I believe in. So yeah, I mean, we do, but we have to be able to talk about it. And I think, again, I keep reinforcing that's my frustration with the COVID narrative, is that it's bifurcated. No one's crossing over. The propaganda is just so firm, and then even the resistance, like they're not setting it up so that you can bring people together. We're just fragmenting. We're consistently like fragmenting. And so if we could talk about the bigger conversation, if we could talk about like the open, like blockchain outside of COVID, right? Like we could talk about it through e-government. We could talk about it through education transcripts. We could talk about these things in ways that would build common ground. But I don't see people doing that, because the reality is most of this media is monetized. People are making livings off of it. they throw stuff in to keep people engaged with this stuff that further exacerbates the divisions, and um, it's challenging. Like, but that doesn't mean that we can give up, because we can't give up. We just have to keep going.
Yeah. Well, and that's my thing is we're all, at different levels, we're all feeding this thing just in just our belief alone. Um, actually helps, it contributes in a large way to it. And just, the step of stopping believing the narratives that they're telling us. That doesn't mean that you have the answer, like when you're letting this narrative go, that doesn't mean you've got it all figured out. But if enough people just stopped believing the narrative and started searching for truth, and stopped contributing to it, saying, no, I'm not going to put my child into this program. And I do think that we could stop this. Absolutely. I am totally convinced of that. But we have a long way to go. But you also have to understand what it is we're up against. And like you said, like a lot of people don't actually understand what this system, what this is. Like, what does that mean to have tokenized behavioral, blockchain identity that's traded in social impact markets? Like,
Well,
most
and we've
people,
never had it before, right?
right?
So we can't, there's not an easy example. I mean, there's bits and pieces that I put together. I can say, well, the play table, surveillance play tables over here fit with the EG headbands, fit with the cotton futures trader guy. Like, but it's not like you can point to one story, and by the time it's all in place, it feels like it's going to be really hard to roll back.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the thing is, uh, I was trying to explain this to people. I'm like, we have a little window. Where's my hands? We have a little window. We have a little window. um, we have a little window of opportunity because, yeah, once these automated systems, once your identity is on the blockchain, and whether or not you can go out, whether or not you can call a cab or an Uber or whatever, whether or not you can go into the store, like the, whether or not you can have money, whether or not your money works. Um, once all those things are put into place, resistance is going to become extremely difficult. So yeah, time is short. Uh, but you know, we do what we can. Let me, let's see. This was just a comment, but on a spiritual level, they're introducing more drugs into the communities. Drugs are a gateway for entities to enter us, and that's a historical thing, actually.
yeah.
By vibe, bringing people's vibes down, or oh, they said that we open up ourselves to possession, and I think that, to me, like using that word as a metaphor is actually kind of apt. Um, and so, anyways, that was just a comment about that. And actually, the history of empire and drugs is fascinating,
Yeah.
because, I mean, the Opium Wars. A lot of people don't know this. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, his family made their fortunes off the opium trade. And if you look at, like, I was kind of studying at the Hong Kong and how Hong Kong came about, and that, like, led me into the Opium Wars and what happened where these local provinces were trying to kick out the opium dens, and the British Empire stepped in and said, no, you're not going to do that. And then,
Well, even in the US, right? I mean, alcohol and in indigenous communities, and putting people on reservations and killing them with bad food. Yeah, yeah. But and the thing is, like, much of the opium trade, like, they're the elite, the Brahmins, right? They're
mm,
the people who are, like, endowing the people behind these important universities, the Harvards, and yeah, it's when you start to actually look at the history, especially of the progressive North, like, it all starts to fall apart, but
yeah,
nobody is meant to know that part of the history.
right. Someone said, look at Robert Spekowski's work on chimp behavior. He's a chimp behavioral expert. They said if you put smelly trash next to someone and have them fill out a form, instantly become more conservative. I actually don't know what that was a comment, but I kind of was trying to get more information about
Hmm.
what they were. I think it was related to other comments that were happening that I kind of should have
Okay.
included in this. But uh, did you see the World Economic is developing a grand narrative for the 21st century? What do you think this will be? Do you know that one?
I haven't looked that up yet. I mean, is
Okay.
it already, have they said it or they're
I don't know. It just says they're developing, this person said they're developing a grand narrative for the 21st century. And it sounds like they had that in quotation. So I don't know if that's like an official title, the
Well, I
grand
mean, it
narrative.
all, like we talked about that this is, I mean, it the challenge that we're in now is telling the story. Like they know. I mean, and yeah, I think early on someone was asking again about the, would you know if your consciousness had been hacked or, wouldn't you notice? And they're so good at everything. Like what I realized early on when I came across frameworks with the MacArthur Foundation and the digital education is that they did the focus groups and then they figured out what they would take to nudge people to the direction that they wanted to get them in the right mindset. And that was maybe 10 years ago. But imagine you can get like the propaganda and the talking points and the social media to everyone so that you just do it a little bit at a time. Like it's so incremental, like you don't even notice. It's like seamless. And by the end, you think it's your idea. Like you think you've come up with this whole thing because it's not abrupt. They're very slow. Like, and it's how they tell the story. And I think that's how the propaganda works is that we've been on these two different paths. And Arizona State, I keep saying they have that weaponized narrative department. That's the future of war is weaponized narrative. And so what is the story that we're going to tell? And so World Economic Forum obviously like has the story that it wants to tell. Although it's kind of ironic to me because there's part of it is like the people who are going to Davos, like they're already sold on it. They don't need a story. The people who don't know anything about the World Economic Forum, they don't need the story either, um, because they don't know about anything about it, right? Like the people who don't know about the Fourth Industrial Revolution, who are a lot of people, like they couldn't care less. So it's almost like the story is for the people who are against the World Economic Forum. If you think about it, like who are they selling? The World Economic Forum is not selling the average man on the street who's never heard of them. And they're not really selling the people who are already sold on them. They're selling it, but I think in many respects they're stoking the fire for us to be like outraged against them. And so we just have to, I think, be cautious of
I,
how we respond to their narrative.
I hear what you're saying, but I have a little bit different take on that. That isn't necessarily in replace of what you're saying, but maybe in addition to what you're saying. Because I actually watch. I subscribe to World Economic Forum's YouTube channel as
Yeah.
well as Bank of International Settlements and IMF and all
I
the.
mean, they're probably doing the talking heads. Like maybe they're
Well,
getting at the middle.
I
Like they're
think
getting at the corporate media
I think what they're
policymaker.
selling it right now, the rollout is actually to the administrators and the people who are going to have to actually
Yeah.
do the work. It's not the general public. These are because I watch, like I listen to the conversations that are happening, and they're all just kind of like the worker bees. They're the people that need to be indoctrinated into this new thing. So I think they're not rolling it out to the general public. The general public doesn't. Most people don't even know anything about any of this. Like they have no clue what the World Economic Forum is. They have no clue about any of the changes that they're doing, like nothing. But it's all just like people that are that have different nonprofits and different that are in different academic positions. I think
The
that's
experts.
the experts. I think that's who it's for. It's for the experts
It's their
uh,
club.
at their club. Yeah,
They get to be hazed into the club. Yeah.
yeah. Uh, this one I'm not really sure. Did you go to Eugene, Oregon? I didn't know please give an overview of your experience in Eugene, Oregon, or what her opinion of gifted and talented school programs. So I don't. Does that question make sense to you? It doesn't make sense to me. Okay.
Um, well, I didn't, well, actually, I did go to Eugene, Oregon on a college visit, but it wasn't for this officially. It was actually quite an odd
Yeah,
place.
I don't know what
But
they're.
while I was there, I realized that Concentric Sky was there. which was on, I think, the National Laboratory for Education Transformation page. And there were a couple of people that were in Eugene who actually did a little like ceremony, a revocation in front of the office for Concentric Sky, which is this place where they're doing badges. It's called Badger. But it's not just Oregon, it's through the World Bank and a number of other systems now. So it's really global, these competency badges. But I don't know anything about the gifted and talented. I mean, per se, like clearly like the deep state cultivates smart kids and to bring them in, but I don't know anything specific about Oregon.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. I didn't know where that question was coming from. Because I don't remember any like videos of you going to Oregon or anything lately.
Well, there were two people. I actually did a talk. Like there were two women that went and did this revocation, and then I did a talk about it. But it was probably a year ago. Maybe it was like way earlier this year. If somebody came across it.
Okay. Well, that's pretty much it. So I guess we'll end it a little bit shorter today. But thank you guys for joining us, and we're gonna do one more of these on Sunday.
Oh, can I say one last thing?
Yes, please.
Okay. Sorry, I forgot. Well, so like the whole end of this piece was about the digital badges, right? And I've talked about MacArthur and digital media learning, and Chicago is a central pilot. I think it is DePaul in Chicago, a professor from there, and the Chicago Public Library System. So that was a pilot for these out of school time learning. That's really central to all of this stuff, is that they want to get the kids out of school. So school is only for terrible things like being tested and doing boring online learning. And then all of the fun stuff happens outside of school. And that's where they get the behavioral data and the social data and the badging systems. And so the cities of LRNG were spun out of MacArthur. A collective shift is the name of the entity, and they coincide with a lot of smart cities. So Philadelphia is a city of LRNG2, which is connected to the badging system. And the thing is, like with the badging, like you can get some good badges in a city, but like how do you get badges in rural areas or remote areas? Like how are you going to get this online learning? It's going to come through virtual reality. And what I just found out today before we got online is that there's a software application called XAPI, which is what facilitates the badges. And so originally when you were doing online education with a screen-based, like a laptop device or a Chromebook, and the children were doing an online learning program like Dreambox or something like that, the interface to collect the data was called SCORM, Shareable Content Object Reference Module. So the stuff you were doing online was collected through SCORM, and it's going to be used for the data dashboards for the human capital markets. But it didn't work for tablets, and it didn't work for phones, and it didn't work for wearables. So they came up with a new interface called XAPI, and XAPI got data from all of that stuff. And now they're going to start pushing virtual reality on blockchain, tied to the credentials and badges. So literally you can do these simulations like in Ready Player One and earn badges in a haptic environment. And so the company that I've had for several years, like a SlideShare, it's called like a taxonomy for augmented and virtual reality data capture. And it came out of a company called JCA Solutions based in Orlando, Florida. And it was a defense contracting simulation company. But their SlideShare was all about like, this is how children learn to pet a dog, and you have to go through all the proper steps to pet a dog, and then you get the pet a dog badge. But it was in virtual reality, and it had this diagram that showed all of the different elements of data that were being captured out of the virtual reality headset. Well, I just found out today that the company that designed the XAPI technology, which was Roostichi Software and SCORM, they merged with JCA Solutions. And so I think that that's really important as we understand like the digital badging in the cultural institutions, that like in the future, literally you might be going to cultural institutions in your headset, right? Like you might not like, I mean, I always felt really bad towards the end of my child's like public school experience in high school. Like high school kids always go on fewer field trips, but like literally the kids were getting no field trips, like no culture. And we're in a city with like their school was a stone's throw from the corridor with all of the museums. They weren't going there. And I think in this future, the kids are just gonna like, you're gonna go to the Met or the Louvre or the wherever in your virtual reality headset, and then you're gonna do the stuff that they tell you to do to get the badge. And it's just, it's really frustrating to try to explain to people that I don't think it's that far off. I really think that we're getting much closer to coming. And like somebody on Twitter yesterday, they were like, you know, my kid wants a VR headset for Christmas and my partner doesn't understand the problems behind these online spaces. And I was like, you know, beyond even the child predators in these spaces, and now with haptics, like who knows how kids could be harmed, like with like more direct tactile and other things like coming online with, it's just like beyond being exposed or stalked or mentally harmed. Like there's, it's scary, you know, and that's already happened in Roblox and other things, is that like you're it's parasitizing these kids. And but it's all supposed to look really fun, right? Like wrap it in a bow and give it for your holiday gift. I don't know.
There was one other
That's all I,
question, but I'm not really
yeah.
sure like what the question is. Like it says, how did we end up being the ones watching WEF videos and seeing this shit? How do we end up being the ones? I don't
Oh,
really.
how are they the ones? Well, I
I
mean, I think like, I mean, I think it's just like maybe that's why, who are we to see it, right? I mean, I think some of us are all like, because we're the outliers in our groups, right? Like this has sort of thrown things into stark relief. So we're always like, well, why can I see it and other people can't?
Yeah.
Like why is this so apparent to us and not people we care about, not people it's not like people that we never cared about or people we held very strongly different views with don't get it. It's like people who otherwise we were all in alignment with. It just, and I don't know.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that my whole life. I'm like, why are people? Because I would, I've always asked questions, and even in high school, I'd be hanging out with my friends, we'd be smoking pot or whatever, and I'd start, I'd be asking like, what do you think about this, or be talking. And I was really anti-war back then, so I would talk a lot about like, the Gulf War that was going on or whatever, and like. They just the lack of curiosity or interest was always like kind of mind blowing to me. But then when it came to things that like deeply and heavily affected your life, like the progressives and the left, so-called left or whatever, blows my mind because I'm like, you're putting all of this energy and all of this effort into going to protest and making signs and writing your representatives and campaigning and donating to these different nonprofits, and then I come along and say, hey, by the way, what you're doing doesn't actually get to you to where you're wanting to go, and here's how and here's why. Particularly when I started to understand how the monetary system works, I'm like, you cannot solve this problem unless you deal with this. And the utter lack of interest in studying it for years and years and years, I spent trying to talk people about this and get them understand, like, you care about the ecology, you care about poverty, why won't you study this? This is where it's coming from.
Yeah.
And there's
No, you're
like,
right.
no, they would just go right back to their stupid nonprofit or the Democratic Party or whatever. And I'm just like, I cannot. Don't waste your time. Like there's funner things to do if you're doing something and it's clearly not actually you're not dealing with the source of the problem. Why waste your
But see,
time
the
and
thing
energy?
is, like, I think people build their identity into these communities. And so it's not really ultimately about solving the problem. It's
Oh
about
yeah.
being in community,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and nobody wants to let go of their community. So you just keep doing it. And I think that's something that we have to understand, even from like a resistance standpoint, is like, why are we doing all these things, right? Well, you're part of the community until you're not.
Yeah, I guess
know?
that's I guess the big thing that differentiates us, people that are willing to like lose every friend and family member in pursuit of the truth. Hopefully that's not the case, but I actually made that conscious decision once all this COVID stuff happened. I saw what was happening. I saw that
Yeah.
that divergence, and I said, I have to make how committed am I to this? Because, even today I still have family that are like very upset with me. And but to me, my religion is pursuit of truth, like that's not saying I'm going to get there, but like I'm on that. And like, if you're coming along, great. If not, like that, I'm bummed, I would like to have you in my life, but I don't know. It's kind of, I've lost a lot of friends and, um, supporters and what over the past couple years. I mean, even going back, like the Hillary Clinton thing, the Hillary Trump thing was a big one too, where people were really upset that I wouldn't support Hillary Clinton because I'm supporting Trump. But anyway, yeah, none of the above.
None of the above. None of the
Um,
above.
all right. Well, I guess that's a good place to stop. And yeah, we'll do this one more time. And thank you guys for joining us. So thank you, Allison.
All right.